What's up, everybody? It's Jordan, and welcome to the Sports Behind Show. On today's episode, I have guest Blake Jude join me. How you doing today, Blake?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me on for another podcast. I'm excited to get talking more about this free agency that's coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. So much to talk about with free agency going on. There's already been a couple of moves. So I figured in this episode we would talk about, maybe some moves the Bengals could make. Because we both have Bengal pages. Lots of listeners on here are Bengal fans. Talk about where some of the top free agents may land in free agency. And speaking of free agency, there's already been quite a bit of moves, like I said. And with people getting cut and cap casualties, very surprising. They, in my opinion, with a huge surprise with the New England Patriots re-signing Cam Newton. What were your thoughts on Newton re-signing with the Patriots?
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a desperation move for the Patriots. I did a quarterback prediction for the AFC with a couple of other Bengals pages, and I actually predicted New England to go with Jimmy Garoppolo, which what I was told was going to be one of their main targets for this offseason. I assume since they re-signed Cam Newton, I'm assuming the 49ers, were probably off on any deals with the Patriots to regain Jimmy Garoppolo. So I would assume Cam Newton was probably a backup plan of some sort. I'm a little bit surprised as well, especially for the contract. I know that they were saying like 1 year, $14 million around that area. I think only about $5 million that was guaranteed. So really not a lot. But for a quarterback, a rotational quarterback like Cam Newton, I think it's a fair contract for sure. I didn't think that this would be the way they go. I know that they're still developing Jarrett Stidham in the back, and there's always a chance that they can go for a guy like Jacoby Brissett, who also has experience already with the New England Patriots. But roll with Cam Newton maybe another year. This is probably another year of, to an extent, tanking. They're not going to be big contenders next year, I don't think, with Cam Newton at quarterback. Then next year they could probably look towards trying to add that quarterback, or maybe trying to add a developmental quarterback this year. Maybe a guy like Kyle Trask in the later rounds, and see if they can develop him to being a future starter quarterback instead.
Yeah, I really thought that Garoppolo was going to be the guy. Before the season ended, I thought Garoppolo was going to be their person because, kind of goes back to the theory I had with San Francisco trading up for Zach Wilson, which I do think still is possible. For San Francisco to trade Jimmy Garoppolo and get Zach Wilson, the draft cap what I get for Garoppolo, that would go towards the Wilson trade. And Garoppolo's contract is ridiculous, but at the same time, I think he could have done really, really well with Belichick in New England because he already had that history and everything. Garoppolo's not great. He's about average, maybe a little bit better. But I just don't understand the contract with Newton. To me, it would be one thing if Newton would have signed with them for a 1 year deal, like 5 or 6, because it's 14 to me. I know you said the guaranteed money was only around $5 million. I just don't get it. You're better off trying to trade up for Trey Lance, in my opinion. Trey Lance to me is one of the best quarterbacks in the draft. And I know you're going to have to waste some of your top picks in the next couple of seasons, but I would rather have Lance than Newton even week 1 this season because he wasn't good this past season with New England. Prior to New England, he was 0-8 his last 8 starts with the Panthers. And that was a reason to me. I just didn't understand Newton going to the Patriots. But I do agree with what you said with Trask, maybe in the second. Somebody I really like possibly is Jamie Newman. Maybe in the 3rd round or so, 4th round, maybe just depends. But I think it'll be really, really interesting to see what happens with New England this free agency and just in the next year or so, especially.
Yeah, Jamie Newman is another name that you mentioned. I would like that a lot. Newman really didn't really get to play in 2020 because he was opting out for the NFL draft, so he never really had the chance to prove himself. But there was a very possible scenario that if he was a quarterback this year for the Georgia Bulldogs, he could have also been a first-round hype kind of guy if he showed more improvement. So certainly a possibility a guy like Trask or Newman end up becoming 2nd or 3rd round options for the New England Patriots. And I think New England tends to go for those guys in the middle rounds rather than the first early rounds for quarterbacks. And, I always trust Bill Belichick. His evaluations for players are fantastic. So I think he could probably find the right move there. As for Cam Newton in general, he gets to go back to the Patriots. He gets to be a starting quarterback for another year, so I don't blame him. I think if he goes anywhere else, he's likely going to be looking at a backup job. So I don't blame him for taking this contract at all, especially with the money that's being offered on the table. New England gets a bunch of guys back from COVID leave. They're going to have, a lot of players hitting free agency, but they do have a pretty good amount of cap space and a good amount of picks they can acquire as well. So if they can add a couple of pieces around Cam Newton, maybe they can improve a little bit next season. But I agree with you. I think if they're going to end up becoming a contender for the future, they're going to need to look towards adding a new quarterback, a guy like Trey Lance, if possible. If they can find a way to trade up for Trey Lance, that would be fantastic. Because I feel like Trey Lance has all the attributes Cam Newton does, plus some with the arm that he carries. So I think that any way that you can try to get the better quarterback, you probably should go for it, at least for this season. If not, if you can't find a way to get any guy like that, maybe look towards next season, towards maybe trying to find one of those quarterbacks next year. I know there's plenty of guys like Sam Howell, who could be potential, pretty good picks. Spencer Rattler as well. A couple of guys that I think could be, solid if you're if you're picking in the top 10. So maybe next year is probably what you're going to look at instead. Because at pick 15, it's a bit of an awkward pick, to be able to have. To find a good quarterback there. There always is a chance like Mac Jones falls. I'm personally not a big fan of Mac Jones compared to other people, so I would look towards either trying to go for a Trey Lance type, maybe looking for a Jamie Newman later on, or just maybe stalling it until next year and just having another year tanking.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Jamie Newman to me, when I see Jamie Newman, I literally see exactly Cam Newton 2.0. And that's one of those scenarios, like, to me, like I would say most people would say, Cam Newton's, his best days are behind him. And let's say Newton does pretty well with New England, or they think he's going to be good, or they kind of want to go to a, running quarterback system. I think Newman would be a possibility. And, Newman and Newton are very similar. And, I really don't think there's any other quarterback Jimmy Newman can learn better playing-wise than Cam Newton, because they're so much alike. Speaking of the quarterbacks, with Cam Newton signing with the Patriots today, there's a couple of decent quarterbacks in free agency, like Ryan Fitzpatrick, Alex Smith, Dalton, Trubisky, Jacoby Brissett. Let's start off with a former Bengal. Where do you think Dalton may end up?
Andy Dalton's got a tough, an interesting free agency ahead of him, because you could make the argument he might be one of the best free agents on the board right now. Despite, kind of being the main backup last season for the Cowboys, even though he ended up starting for the majority of the season after Dak Prescott got hurt. I'm not sure the Cowboys are very interested in getting him back, especially now that they have Ben DiNucci as well, who wasn't anything special, but also I think could be a serviceable backup here in the future. But as for Dalton, I think that he can go to a team that's looking for a backup. I once considered the Patriots to be probably one of the favorites to land him this offseason up until they signed Cam Newton. So maybe the Patriots may look and say, like, hey, maybe just get some more competition for Cam Newton and Andy Dalton and let them go at it to see who makes it. I think that's certainly a possibility. I also look at teams possibly like I immediately think of a team like New Orleans Saints, who need more competition right now. They are paying Taysom Hill a lot. They don't have a lot of money left in the cap. But at the same time, Jameis Winston is still a very unproven guy, and he's likely to be a starter. And if you think Taysom Hill should stay as being the Swiss Army knife for your team, you're going to have to look for another guy to kind of compete with Jameis Winston. So I think Andy Dalton could be a good fit there. And another team I have really been considering lately is the Chicago Bears. They don't really have much there. They have Nick Foles, I believe, a quarterback right now, and Mitchell Trubisky. I've seen a lot of people offer or think like maybe Mitchell Trubisky could be a re-signed for a couple of years for the Bears. But if not, I think Dalton could be another solid addition, a good bridge quarterback for the Bears to try to save them over until next season, and whenever they actually start really, really targeting for a quarterback, maybe even a guy like Deshaun Watson if they can.
Yeah, to me, Andy Dalton and Mitchell Trubisky are two quarterbacks, like two of the top quarterbacks in my opinion, where I just have no idea. I have a couple of teams. Dalton, to me, an intriguing spot. Jacoby Brissett's a free agent, and obviously, Philip Rivers retired. I like the Colts, and I know it kind of sounds weird, especially because I just, traded for Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz has only played 16 games in just one season of his career. Dalton didn't play bad when Dak Prescott got hurt. I think, Dalton could be a pretty nice backup, and, if, Wentz goes down again, and like he has in years past, I think it could be another scenario. Dalton, fights to get a starting job back. I think it's possible the Bears, to me, I think Ryan Fitzpatrick makes a little bit of sense there. I think, Fitzpatrick is one of the more Underrated. I don't know. Underrated. One of the best backup quarterbacks, definitely. I mean, I think he'd be a fantastic bridge quarterback. I think he helped do a lot this past season with Miami, even though Miami won, Tua didn't play great. But I don't really think there's many other old quarterbacks you can learn more from than Ryan Fitzpatrick. Jacoby Brissett, I mentioned him. I think an interesting spot would be the Eagles. I'm not sold on Jalen Hurts a ton, and if he goes down, which it seems like mobile quarterbacks go down quite a bit in the NFL, I think Brissett, he's a pretty decent backup. And I think he's one of the more underrated backups in the NFL. I think I think Hurts could learn from him some, but it's going to be really interesting to see where some of these quarterbacks goes. And it was announced last week that Washington released Alex Smith, comeback player of the year. Lots of people were upset about that move. Personally, this is like a business. I thought that was a fantastic move. It had to be done. I mean, they now have over $50 million in cap space. With that, is there any teams you may think that? What teams do you think Alex Smith may go to in free agency?
Yeah, Alex Smith is a guy that I think should and likely will mull retirement, possibly. He came back last year, comeback player of the year, played fantastic. He proved that he came back after that insane injury, and I was extremely happy for him. I thought that was a terrific. Um, I think it was just terrific for him. It made me happy. I thought it was amazing. They made the playoffs. They played really, really well. Unfortunately, after Smith got hurt for the last game of the season, Taylor Heineke came in and honestly, I think impressed even more than what Alex Smith did throughout the season. And I think Taylor Heineke's really inserted himself as being a promising backup quarterback for the football team right now. So Alex Smith's kind of stuck in some sort of a limbo. I think Smith historically has always been kind of a, more of a check down guy, more of a short to medium pass range kind of guy. So he's more of a guy who's not going to really hurt your team. He's not going to improve your team much either. I know a team like the New York Jets have had guys like Joe Flacco in the past, and I think they still have Joe Flacco now, maybe, who are good veteran leaders in the back that can help groom the quarterbacks of the future. I think if the Jets move on from Flacco and they look towards adding someone else, I think Alex Smith would be a terrific option there. And I also look at teams like, I'm not leaving out the possibility of possibly the football team trying to re-sign him for a cheaper deal just to create more competition in the backfield. I think it's certainly possible. And I also look at teams like the 49ers, a team that, has experience with Alex Smith already. They already know what he's like, and they are quarterback needy at this point with Jimmy Garoppolo having this question mark. He's had a lot of injuries in the past. Maybe bring in Alex Smith to be that backup quarterback for your team and see what he can do. So I think there's several teams that can inquire for Alex Smith, but overall, I think the best option for him, in my opinion, would just be to retire. I think he's proved so much to this point, and I don't think he's ever going to carry a team more than what he already has with the Washington football team. So I really don't see how it gets much better for Alex Smith already. I think he should just go ahead and leave on a high note as a comeback player of the year and just enjoy retirement, enjoy his family, and hopefully he can stay healthy for the rest of his life.
Yeah, retiring would make quite a bit of sense for Alex Smith. And on a high note, what more do you have to prove? I mean, you nearly lost your life in a surgery, and I mean, you come back and win comeback player of the year. You lead your team to the playoffs. If he, does play the season, to me, of other quarterbacks, I think this makes the most sense. I think the Jaguars. Like, I absolutely love the Jaguars because, I mean, Trevor Lawrence, Alex Smith could be a mentor to Trevor Lawrence. Alex Smith is one of the most respected quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, he's had so much adversity. He's gone through so much the past several years. I think that is part of the reason. Another reason, Urban Meyer actually coached Alex Smith in college. And to me, I just really think it makes a lot of sense because, I mean, I really doubt Gardner Minshew is on the team next season for Jacksonville. You would have Trevor Lawrence, and I believe that's your only quarterback on the roster. So I really think Alex Smith can make some sense there in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I think that would be another good fit. Jacksonville is kind of looking for that backup quarterback in the event, whenever you draft a guy like Trevor Lawrence at number 1 overall, which let's be real, they are going to draft Trevor Lawrence. I might want to get a good veteran in the back at least to, kind of groom him, make him, get used to the NFL level because there are question marks on whether or not Trevor Lawrence's scheme in Clemson will, translate well into the NFL because Clemson runs a very college, spread sort of scheme. And I know there's been a history of a lot of quarterbacks having some trouble moving on from one to the other. But there are still guys like Deshaun Watson out there who did it to a T and is fantastic. So I'm not saying that's going to be an issue for Trevor Lawrence, but it certainly is a possibility. So I think adding a guy like Alex Smith to help him groom into the NFL level would be a fantastic idea. I also look towards teams like the Broncos, who, the supposed MVP, Drew Lock, didn't perform too well that season, but certainly a possibility they look to create more competition down the line as well. So a guy like Alex Smith could maybe be added there. I think the Broncos have really built a good wide receiver core, especially with the yards after catch like Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler. So I think that'd be a really good fit for Alex Smith if he were to return. Plus, you have an offensive line that might be the best in their division now that the Raiders and the Chiefs have basically blown up their offensive line. So, a pretty good, I think, overall offense there. He could fit in pretty well as a backup.
Yeah, Drew Lock. That's probably going to go down one of my all-time worst predictions. I guarantee it. That was just horrible. But that was just horrible. So I think the Broncos could make some sense there because he was supposed to win the MVP, and now it's not a guarantee he's going to even have his job now. I think it's a possibility. He gets traded to Houston. I would personally love that trade if I'm the Broncos. Let's say whoever trades for Deshaun Watson is 100% trading their starting quarterback. Drew Lock, let's say 3 first-round picks and Bradley Chubb. I know that may seem a little too much. Bradley Chubb only has 1 year on his contract. That's not including his 5th-year option that the Broncos have yet to do or not. But I just think that would be a great idea for the Broncos if they would trade for Deshaun Watson. I think they're Super Bowl contenders immediately, but I want to be against them signing Alex Smith, but suppose the MVP was a big letdown this past season. So go to running backs here. There's quite a bit. There's a couple of pretty good running backs. It was announced that Mark Ingram signed with the Texans. To me, that was quite a bit of surprise. And there's a couple of top-tier running backs. Aaron Jones is obviously the standout one. There's Fournette, Todd Gurley. Where do you think some of those guys may end up?
Yeah, just to start out with Aaron Jones, first guy you mentioned, I think all signs for Aaron Jones is really pointing towards the Miami Dolphins being the best destination for him and the most likely destination. Miami has rotated between many running backs in the last couple of years. Guys like, Kalen Ballage, I believe, Matt Breida. A bunch of guys have been going in and out with there. Len Bowden's been the rookie that's been kind of being a running back wide receiver hybrid. Several guys have gone in and out with the Miami Dolphins for not just recently, but also for many years. So Miami's looking for more stability there at the running back position. I think a guy like Aaron Jones could be a very, very good option for them. It really has a good nose for the end zone, and I think it's great to have a safety blanket like Aaron Jones who can be effective in the receiving game. We saw Aaron Rodgers throughout the season with the Packers. Really, if he ever had any trouble or any kind of pressure in his face, just dump it off to Aaron Jones and let him work. I think that'd be fantastic for Tua. If he ever faces any pressure, instead of trying to force a throw and throw an interception, which he did a lot last year, maybe throwing it into the flats to Aaron Jones lets you build trust with a guy like that. I think that could be a very, very good fit there for the Miami Dolphins for sure. I think that might be probably my favorite overall prediction currently right now, but for at least Aaron Jones.
Yeah, I like Aaron Jones to Miami a lot. I think it makes so much sense. And, running back has been their main issue on offense for the past several seasons. And I know I just mentioned Deshaun Watson with the Broncos. But let's say, Miami would want to trade for Deshaun Watson. You would get Watson and sign Aaron Jones. I think that's a potentially Super Bowl contender. I think, with, Devontae Parker, who's extremely underrated, Mike Gesicki, they were a pretty nice defense. Byron Jones. I think that could work really, really well. I love Jones to Miami. There's also Fournette. I think Fournette would just, re-sign with Tampa Bay more than likely, just a 1-year deal, maybe $1 million or $2 million. And there's also Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, to me, is really interesting because, he was absolutely horrible this past season. I thought he was really, really good. He did not even average 50 rushing yards a game, which is just insane. I know it may not really seem popular. I know it doesn't really make any sense. I kind of like Baltimore. They just lost Mark Ingram. And I don't know. They just run so much. They have 4 or 5 guys run like Gus Edwards, Ingram, A.K. Dobbins, Lamar Jackson. I would kind of like to see Todd Gurley in Baltimore because let's say he signs a 1-year deal like in his past season with Atlanta, has a pretty good season. maybe resurrects his career, maybe finds a starting role again in the NFL.
Yeah, and also Chris Carson, another big name. I think it's hitting free agency as well. I didn't get to mention him. I really think he could. There's a lot of teams that he could fit on. Specifically, I think the Bills and the Steelers are the first two names I think of. The Steelers, of course, finally getting over the cap space, and now they're able to actually make a couple of deals. Likely losing James Conner to free agency this year, who might be another big name that enters free agency. They're going to need a running back to replace him. I think Chris Carson could be a good workhorse guy for the Steelers. And as for the Bills, they had Devin Singletary, who was used to a certain extent, but not nearly as much. So I think the Bills were the team that passed the most in the NFL. Never really had much of a run game. Zach Moss hasn't really panned out very well for them. And Devin Singletary, like I said, has been pretty effective in the passing game somewhat, but it hasn't really been a primary dynamic runner for your team. So maybe getting a guy like Chris Carson, who could be a workhorse, takes a little bit more pressure off of Josh Allen and that offensive line and pass protection, and lets you just have a guy who can get you 3 or 4 yards, per carry, and get you pretty much an automatic first down if you need for your team. I think another team that actually would fit pretty well for him as well is the Cardinals, who are in a very similar position with Kenyon Drake and Chase Edmonds being really primarily pass-catching running backs. You need a guy like Chris Carson who can be a good runner, a good workhorse kind of guy for your team. Just a lot of teams who don't really have that workhorse running back could really use a guy like Chris Carson, who I think might actually attract a pretty fairly good market, even though he didn't have much of a successful season with the Seahawks last year.
Yeah, Carson's one of the more underrated running backs in the NFL, in my opinion. Like you said, there's also James Conner, Kenyon Drake, and also Philip Lindsay. I mean, running backs are so interesting in free agency because it seems like once you get around like 28, 29, 30, that's when, like, pretty much for the most part, you're not going to be starter, it seems like, anymore. And since it's the easiest position to replace, I mean, why would teams sign a running back for $5 or $6 million where they can just draft the guy in like the 5th or 6th round and get the same production? And that's kind of like Aaron Jones, he was a late round pick from UTEP, and he's a top 10 running back. Running backs are just so hard to, I would say, evaluate, and especially in free agency in the draft, because if one guy could do it, more than likely somebody else can do it. It'd be really, really interesting. Something interesting, a lot of the Bengal fans are wanting him to resign. Realistically, I don't think he will. Switching over the wide receiver now, it's AJ Green. This is probably the last time I'll wear my green jersey with him, unless he's with somebody else. But realistically, where do you think AJ Green will sign with?
I think AJ's got several fantastic options he can go to, but immediately the first team I think of, and probably would be the best fit for AJ, is the Kansas City Chiefs. The former Super Bowl winners in 2019 ended up losing Super Bowl in 2020. They are likely to lose Sammy Watkins in free agency and Demarcus Robinson. So 2 of your top 4 wide receivers are gone. So you still have Travis Kelce, Mecole Hardman, Tyreek Hill, who are all 3 probably your 3 best weapons and your most dynamic weapons, but you need that third guy, that third wide receiver on your team right now. And they really need that big guy, that Sammy Watkins replacement. I think it's where AJ Green steps in as a perfect fit for this team. He's not going to ask for much. He's not going to demand for much. And Kansas City doesn't have a crazy amount of cap space, so they're not likely to sign one of these bigger name free agents. I think a guy like AJ Green, you can take a risk on him because he's not going to be your wide receiver 1. Obviously, it didn't work very well in Cincinnati. He's much better being that wide receiver 3, that third target for your team. You let Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, Travis Kelce do their own work. AJ Green on one side facing against the third best corner on their team, he's going to smoke him. AJ Green, he might be a little bit more washed, but he's still AJ Green. I would still take him over many other wide receivers in this league. So I think having him as a third option, maybe really a fourth option for Kansas City, would be almost one of the perfect fits for AJ. And most importantly, it gives him a chance to be successful and possibly win a ring.
Yeah, obviously it's probably unlikely that Green will re-sign with the Bengals. If he doesn't re-sign with the Bengals, I really don't care where he signs. As long as it's not the Steelers, I would just want him to, I would want to see him get a ring because, he deserves it and all that. I mean, there's 2 teams, and not this past October, but the year prior, when he didn't play a single game. Back then, I wanted us to trade him because, if we could have got probably a 2nd round pick for him, instead we'll probably get like a 3rd or 4th round compensatory pick. Those picks are at the end of the round. But there's 2 teams to me. There's the Packers and there's the Patriots. I would absolutely love to see Green with the Patriots. I think it could. I think he could, resurrect his career. Obviously, he doesn't have many years left. But I think, he can have one more, prove-it year type of deal, maybe get around maybe 1,000 yards. I think him and Belichick would be outstanding. I also like the Packers because, I mean, you have Devontae Adams, you have Rodgers. If they would sign another wide receiver, which I think they might, and then you sign Green to a cheap deal to be that wide receiver 3, I think that'd be a pretty good fit too. But personally, I've those are just the two teams. I just cannot see any other team signing him. I do think it's possible. We even talked about Andy Dalton. I think it's a possibility wherever Dalton signs, Green could sign. Wherever Green signs, Dalton could sign. I mean, that'll be interesting too. But to me, the two teams right now, in my opinion, are probably the Packers and the Patriots.
Yeah, I think the Packers probably my second team that I would list after the Chiefs, because I agree with you. I want to see him go to a team that can develop wide receivers and has been successful with wide receivers and getting the most out of them. And the Patriots and the Packers are two of those teams that have really defined that, getting the most out of the wide receivers. I think Aaron Rodgers being able to have that next weapon next to Devontae Adams, especially a taller weapon, a bigger guy like A.J. Green would be ideal. He could easily perform well with a guy like Allen Lazard and Devontae Adams across from him, as well as Big Bob Tonyan. So plenty of weapons there if you were to add A.J. Green as well. I think they were all capable, and you could probably win a lot of games with that weapon core as well. So I think that would be a very good place as well for A.J. Green. But, really, I think any team that can, like I said, that can get the most out of A.J. or can be successful even without AJ being a primary factor, I think that would be ideal, because I want to see Green get a ring. He deserves to win games. He deserves to have a chance of winning a ring, and I think he needs to go to a team that is already proven and very good, like the Packers or the Chiefs.
Yeah, it's just so weird with Green. It's like he's been here all this time. It's just a couple of years ago. I mean, you have Dalton, Green, Dunlap, and Atkins. You don't think any of those guys are going to go anywhere. All four are gone within just a little over a year. It's just crazy to think about. And you kind of mentioned the Chiefs, and to me, going to just wide receivers now. When I think of the Chiefs in free agency, you mentioned Sammy Watkins as a free agent. I immediately think Curtis Samuel. I think Curtis Samuel would be an amazing fit with the Chiefs. I mean, he's a speedster wide receiver like the Chiefs have with Hardman and Tyreek Hill. Somebody else to me, and I know. There's a chance he may retire even. I really, really like Deshaun Jackson to the Chiefs too. I mean, he's getting up there in age. I believe he's, around 35, 36, probably something like that. But, I mean, he's, played with Andy Reid when he was in Philadelphia. I really like, both of those guys. I mean, I know Jackson will sign super cheap probably somewhere. I know, Curtis Samuel will have a, bigger market because he's one of the better wide receivers, but both of those guys, Kansas City, I think that's a possibility, and I think those would be great fits for both those players.
Yeah, for sure. I think Curtis Samuel probably is going to attract one of, if not the biggest market for wide receivers, due to the fact that he's not the best wide receiver on the market, but he's going to be probably one of the best value wide receivers. He's not going to be making, Kenny Golladay or Allen Robinson type money. He's not going to be making $20+ million. And we know that only like 3 or 4 teams are really going to be able to pay that player that much money. So, Curtis Samuel's in a very good position because he's set to make around, he's set to make close to around $10 million. He's not going to make a considerable amount of money. And there's a lot of teams that would be willing to offer that to get a wide receiver like Curtis Samuel who can come in and change your team completely. Speaking of the Bengals, I think this is where the Bengals really insert their names into the conversation, because we know that, the Bengals, according to what we've heard, are pretty locked in on Penei Sewell, hopefully, in the draft this year. And I think there's also a scenario where we see them, maybe look towards adding a wide receiver maybe later on in the draft rather than it being a little bit earlier. So if you want to add a true wide receiver 3, you look towards a guy like Curtis Samuel, who could be a very effective guy for your team, possibly, and for a pretty solid deal, I think. Again, in other teams I look at, Jacksonville Jaguars need a lot of help on their wide receiver core across from DJ Shark. I think that could be a very good fit for Curtis Samuel, possibly. And maybe even a team like the LA Rams, who are in dire need of a deep threat, according to what they've said. They've been really looking to find a deep threat for their team to complement along with Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. They just added Matthew Stafford, and I think they've been making a lot of cap moves to try to get more money. I think that getting a guy like a Curtis Samuel, who can be a true deep threat for your team, could be the final factor for your team, because you're likely to lose Josh Reynolds in free agency this year. So you really have those two main wide receivers in Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, and not much else outside of that.
Yeah, I would really like to see Curtis Samuel in Cincinnati. And you mentioned the Rams. The Rams, to me, I mean, obviously, there's Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, Juju Smith, the most overrated wide receiver in the league. But to me, I mean, Golladay and Marvin Jones, I would say more Marvin Jones because, you mentioned the Rams trying to cut some people to get more cap space. Jones makes more sense because he's not going to be nearly as much. I think Marvin Jones could maybe go to the Rams because, he already has familiarity with Stafford. And, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp is probably one of the most underrated wide receiver duos in the league. And I mentioned Golladay. With Marvin Jones, I think Golladay could possibly go to the Colts. I really like that one. And I think Juju Smith, there's a 0 chance he gets to Pittsburgh, and I'm glad of it. Me, I think it's obvious the Jets. I think it makes so much sense. There's no bigger market than New York. I mean, if you're getting that much media traction for no reason at all on commercials and everything like that, with freaking Pittsburgh, I cannot imagine what he's going to get. I mean, he's going to be 100 times more annoying when he goes to New York. But I do think it makes a lot of sense because New York doesn't really have that one, star receiver. They have Denzel Mims, who I like a lot. He hurt some this past season. The Jets have one of the most cap space in the NFL. He also played college football with Sam Darnold. I know that'd be interesting because Darnold could be traded, but I think Juju Smith to the Jets makes sense. Golladay, I like the Colts with him because they have a lot of cap space too. And they need a top wide receiver to help Wentz out. To have Michael Pittman, I like him. I mentioned I really like Marvin Jones to the Rams.
Yeah, I think just to start out, I think Marvin Jones is the perfect fit for the Rams as well. I agree with you. They need a deep threat. Marvin Jones would define that deep threat for their team. As for Kenny Golladay, Colts I think would be a pretty solid fit. They need a true wide receiver 1 for your team, but also a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars, who I already mentioned earlier with Curtis Samuel, who are in need of finding that possibly the number 1 receiver or a receiver next to DJ Shark would be ideal. And as we know, Jacksonville Jaguars have the most money, most cap space, and they're probably going to be able to offer the biggest contract to Kenny Golladay if they in fact want him. So I think getting a guy like Kenny Golladay could be a huge boost for Trevor Lawrence. Getting that number 1 guy like that and possibly trying to build. They already have a pretty solid offensive line now that they've gotten Cam Robinson back. They're not terrible there. And you got Kenny Golladay to match up with other weapons like DJ Shark for that team. You could end up providing a pretty good immediate offensive roster for a guy like Trevor Lawrence. I look at other guys around free agency, like you said, Juju Smith-Schuster. I like the Jets as a good fit there. Like you mentioned, he played with Sam Darnold in the past, but even then, I think he'd be a pretty good addition, even for a quarterback like Zach Wilson, because the ability for him to stay, have that yards after catch early on, while also being able to go deep. He's a pretty dynamic receiver as well. But another team I look towards, Juju Smith-Schuster probably trying to join is maybe the Las Vegas Raiders, a team that just cut Tyrell Williams, or one of the main outside receivers, and also have a guy Nelson Aguilar who is hitting free agency as well. So, 2 of your top 3 guys there are hitting free agency. So you have Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller really being the only 2 main offensive weapons for your team. Adding a guy like Juju, who could be your number 1 guy for the wide receiver core at least, could be huge for a guy like Derek Carr, who needs more offensive weapons to really succeed like he did last year.
The Raiders would make quite a bit of sense for Juju Smith, and it would be really interesting because there's so many wide receivers. I mean, like AJ Green's not what he used to be, but he's in the middle of the pack of receivers in free agency. That tells you, how loaded this free agency class is for wide receivers. So it's going to be really interesting. Zach Wilson is my favorite quarterback of the draft, and Juju Smith would go to the Jets. It's going to be really hard to root for him, throw it to Juju Smith. But going to tight ends now. I mean, there's not really many tight ends. There's about Tyler Eifert, Jonnu Smith, and Gerald Everett. Where do you think some of those guys could maybe end up?
Yeah, I think the main name here, main attraction here is probably Hunter Henry from the Chargers. Probably the best tight end in this class, at least in my opinion, in free agency. Hunter Henry is going to draw a lot of attention from a lot of teams. I think the main team overall that's probably going to show the most interest in tight ends this year is probably the New England Patriots, who have historically been primarily a tight end receiving course. So I expect the Patriots to be in on a lot of these guys, and I think a guy like Hunter Henry could be a big name for New England. But I also look towards another team like Jacksonville, who I already mentioned earlier. They have so much cap space; they can offer a lot of teams money. Tyler Eifert was their original starting tight end. He now hits free agency, so they need to replace him. I think Hunter Henry could be another big name for that team. I think he would be an ideal fit and could be pretty effective. As for Johnny Smith, I think the first couple of teams I really think of are the Carolina Panthers, who need a replacement at tight end. I think he would be a very, very good blocker for the running game with Christian McCaffrey, as well as being a pretty solid receiving weapon for whichever quarterback ends up becoming the starter there. Also, got a team like the Indianapolis Colts, who have had several good tight ends in the past and have really had their tight ends be very, very effective. But they really like the guys who can block. And Johnny Smith's a fantastic blocker, like how Jack Doyle's been for the long time for them. I think he can immediately insert himself in there and be a pretty effective tight end for their team. And maybe even a team like the Houston Texans, who haven't really had a very good dynamic tight end in quite a while. They can probably look to add a guy like either Hunter Henry or Johnny Smith, who can immediately come in and be a pretty dynamic weapon for your team. Even though I think they're probably in tank mode right now, they still have especially if they trade Deshaun Watson, they will have a considerable amount of cap space to be able to make some signings. And I think a guy like Hunter Henry or Johnny Smith could be great additions.
Yeah, I don't know how I forgot Hunter Henry. He's not on my list, which I don't even know how. I mean, he's one of the top end free agents. I agree. I think the Patriots make so much sense. If you're a tight end, if you want to have a star season or a great season, best place to go is easily New England. Aaron Hernandez, Gronkowski, they've had some really nice guys. Also, Tyler Eifert, former Bengal. I think, I know New England drafted a couple of tight ends last season in the later rounds. I think, Eifert even to the Patriots, if they don't sign Henry makes a lot of sense. Last season, I thought, Eifert to the Patriots back last season made a lot of sense too. Brandon Smith, I wouldn't be surprised if he would maybe re-sign with the Titans. Just depends, how much money they have. And Gerald Everett, I think it's a possibility the Bengals sign him. I know, I think there's about two players who are not on the Bengals roster this past season who they may sign. It's Josh Reynolds from the Rams and also Gerald Everett. If we would sign Gerald Everett, I think it's a possibility that CJ Uzomah will get cut. There's a couple millionaire. Uzomah is coming off a season-ending injury. Gerald Everett's about the same player. You can maybe get him a tad bit cheaper or, probably about the same contract or so. Has familiarity with Zach Taylor with the Rams. I think Gerald Everett to the Bengals makes quite a bit of sense.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a possibility since Zach Taylor has a lot of familiarity already with Gerald Everett at tight end. I also think, though, there's a very good chance that, we've heard a lot in the past. The Bengals really like having the players who are injured develop a lot of chemistry together while they are currently, trying to rehab to get all their strength back. So I think there's a very good scenario that CJ Uzomah might be kept to try to build more of a relationship with Joe Burrow and let him be more effective next year, because you might not remember, but first 2 weeks of the season, CJ Uzomah is one of our best receivers for those first two games up until his Achilles injury. But as you mentioned, Achilles injuries can be very, very bad, and there's always is the possibility that it's more worth to get a guy like Gerald Everett for possibly a little bit less money or near the same amount of money, who has already proven to be healthy and is a great established receiving weapon already, rather than taking a risk on a guy like Uzomah, who has injury history now with Achilles and could be, a possible cut candidate either now or in the future.
Yeah, the way we used Uzomah in the Cleveland game, if we would use him that much in the pass offense, I believe he had like 4 catches, touchdowns, something like that before he got injured. If we play him like that normally, I would have no issue with him. To me, I think his contract's a tad bit overpaid, but I really liked how we, started to use him up until he got injured. But it's going to be really interesting, with Uzomah. It was interesting. That kind of goes to the next position. It's offensive line. Bengal fans are wanting pretty much every single offensive lineman who's better than Bobby Hart, and that's every single offensive lineman there is. But, Trent Williams, Tooney, Zeitler, Gabe Jackson, Fisher, Lindsley from the Packers. I could go on and on. There's so many cap casualties. It seems like every single day. Turner, the guard, was released today. Who are some? What do you think some of those offensive linemen may go in free agency?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I really think the main teams that are going to be in dire need of offensive line are likely going to be offering the most amount of money. Are the Chargers and Bengals being the primary two, but also teams like the Ravens being a team that could probably be offering a good amount of contracts for offensive linemen. possibly the Las Vegas Raiders, who just cut Gabe Jackson and traded Trent Brown, so saved a lot of money, but are in dire need of more offensive linemen now, I think. As well as other teams like Kansas City, who just cut their two best tackles, Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz. I think there's plenty of teams who can use offensive line. I think almost every single team in the NFL could use offensive line, but specifically for guys like Joe Thuney, who are at the top of the market, I immediately look towards teams like the New York Jets, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Baltimore Ravens, Cincinnati Bengals being the best contenders for him, since they have the most amount of cap space. So they're able to pay him the most amount of money, but also have some of the biggest guard needs in the NFL overall. If you ask me, those are the four main contenders for Joe Thuney. I'd be shocked if he signs anywhere else other than either the Jets, Ravens, Bengals, or possibly I forgot the other team I mentioned already. The Chargers being the other team. So I think one of those four teams are probably going to be the guy who ends up signing probably the best offensive lineman right now in free agency, or best guard.
Thuney to me is really interesting. Realistically, not being biased, I think the Bengals have a pretty good chance of signing him. I think it's just a matter if the Bengals are willing to pay the money that Thuney wants. I think the Chiefs kind of make quite a bit of sense because they're releasing some of the top offensive linemen. I feel like Andy Reid has a plan, and he's like going to do something that nobody's really expecting, and that may possibly be signing Joe Thuney. I mean, Thuney's really interesting. Trent Williams too. I've heard some people want the Bengals to sign Trent Williams. I wouldn't be totally against it. Who would you rather sign, Trent Williams or Joe Thuney, if you're the Bengals?
Yeah, this has been an interesting debate, and I think just to start out, I find it very hard to believe Trent Williams goes anywhere else outside of the San Francisco 49ers. From everything what I've heard, it's pretty much a guarantee that he will be back in San Francisco. So I doubt he will even have the option of going to the Bengals. But if I'm Cincinnati and I'm sitting there right now, I would offer Trent Williams $20 million to be a Bengal over offering $15 million for Joe Thuney to be a Bengal personally. Trent Williams is probably the best offensive tackle in the NFL, period. I mean, he is fantastic. He is one of the best for sure. And I think priority number one this offseason is protecting Joe Burrow. So as great as Joe Thuney is, and I think he is probably one of the better guards in the NFL for sure, Trent Williams is the best offensive tackle, maybe even the best offensive lineman right now in the NFL. You can make an argument between him, guys like Zach Martin and Quentin Nelson as well, also being really far up there. But he is definitely, I think, in top 5, if not top 3 consideration as being a top offensive lineman. So I think being able to add a guy like Trent Williams, if you could, just a Hail Mary signing possibly, would be just fantastic, out of this world for this team. They need a guy like that. You could find a way to shift the offensive line around because you'd probably have to move Jonah Williams if you were to put Trent Williams on the roster there. But I think moving Jonah Williams over to right tackle would be completely fine. You have your left tackle side locked up for a considerable amount of time. I know there is question marks with Trent Williams' age. I believe he's around 33 right now. So, maybe he only has a couple more years left in him. But I would offer him a 3-year, $60 million contract if he wants to come down here and be a Bengal without question. I think that would be a fantastic move. He's the best offensive lineman, and I would offer him a large sum of money to be here.
Yeah, I would also rather have Williams than Thuney. I do think it's close, though. I mean, Thuney, he's probably going to get 14 or 15, I would say. Williams, I'd be surprised if he does not leave San Francisco. Personally, to me, I know a guard issue, it is a big issue, but I would rather sign Trent Williams over Thuney, sign Trent Williams and sign a guy like Kevin Zeitler. I mean, we have quite a bit of, cap space, and, I wouldn't mind Joe Thuney at all, but I really feel like some Bengal fans are just, it's one of those scenarios where, I mean, they want offensive linemen. They know Joe Thuney's the best guard, so let's automatically get him type of deal. There's lots of good guards. We do not necessarily need Joe Thuney. I mean, you look, Kevin Zeitler, Schwartz from the Chiefs who just got cut, Gabe Jackson, Turner who got released today. I would rather have Trent Williams over Joe Thuney, and I would also, and it may sound kind of crazy, I would also rather have Kevin Zeitler than Joe Thuney. Give me Zeitler for 7 or 8, and maybe like another guard or so, then rather than Joe Thuney for about 14 or 15. I feel like Zeitler is a lot more realistic than getting Thuney. I think it's better for the team, and I mean it's not going to be nearly as much if we get Zeitler for Thuney because I mean really Zeitler would be close to about half as what Thuney will get probably in free agency.
Yeah, right. And I actually agree. I think Kevin Zeitler making around $7 to $8 million per year. That would really open up the chance of you getting another offensive lineman like an Andrew Norwell or a Trey Turner in free agency as well. And personally, I would rather have two offensive guards over just one offensive guard. I think you can really get two above average offensive guards rather than getting I would say probably a top 12 offensive guard in Chotini, maybe top 10. I'd say he is a great offensive guard. Don't get me wrong, but I would much rather have a guy like Zeitler to match with a guy like Trey Turner or Andrew Norwell personally, because you have more than one need on the offensive line. You need to solve both spots. So I think right guard and left guard being able to solve those for a pretty considerable amount of time would be ideal for this team for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see, what the Bengals do, on the offensive line, just, offensive line in general with, offensive linemen getting released, it seems like every single day now. And, something else, defensive line. I mean, there's quite a bit of defensive linemen, like Carl Lawson, and there's so many other players as well. What do you think some of the top defensive tackles and edge rushers may end up in free agency?
Yeah, I think the top guy we're really looking at right now is Shaquille Barrett. I think he's most likely to re-sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, at least from what I'm hearing. Shaq Barrett has been one of the best edge rushers in the league since signing with Tampa Bay, and they are a Super Bowl contender, and so Tampa Bay would, of course, like to get him back, and I think he is probably the most likely to re-sign. There's been, as Bengals fans, we've been talking about this for quite a while. There has been a lot of rumors of whether or not Carl Lawson wants to return or not. After listening to the podcast with Paul Dehner Jr. and Jay Morrison of The Athletic, it really kind of seems like to me Lawson has a lot of interest returning Cincinnati as well. So I think there is a possibility he probably goes somewhere else. But as of right now, I think Cincinnati's currently the favorite for sure. I think if Cincinnati is willing to offer him the amount of money he wants, he probably will return to the team. So I'm pretty confident in saying both Carl Lawson and Shaq Barrett returns to their respective teams. But another guy I'm really interested in is Unique Ngakoue, a defensive end from the Baltimore Ravens, who kind of came in, didn't do too much. He was still a pretty effective pass rusher for sure, but he wasn't to the same degree he was in Jacksonville. I still think he's going to have a pretty good market, especially if Lawson and Shaq Barrett were to resign, because he likely is probably the next best pass rusher on the free agent market. So I look at several different teams, like the Buffalo Bills being a big contender for him, and especially a team like the Tennessee Titans, who are in dire need of finding a pass rush right now. I think that would be a really good fit for a guy like Unique Ngakoue. As for more of the interior guys, it is a pretty weak class overall for the interior, at least. Shelby Harris is a big name that comes to mind. I think that he's a pretty good pass rusher on the inside, and he's another name I think that could be a pretty big contender for the Cincinnati Bengals if they were to want to add a 3-tech to the team. But honestly, I really don't see many other fits outside of that. I know Tampa Bay is likely to be in the market possibly for a 3-tech to add up across from Vita Vea, who has been a fantastic nose tackle for their team. Of course, teams like the New York Jets, possibly the New York Giants, several different teams I think could be contenders. Maybe even a team like the Cleveland Browns, who have pretty solid defensive tackles, but could probably use an extra pass rusher in the middle to help Myles Garrett out a little bit. I think that could be a pretty good addition. Also, going to guys like Gerald Casey. I know he could be a pretty interesting name here. He's only 32 years old, which is, to an extent, a little old, but not too old. He could find there's plenty of different teams that can go to him. I think of another team that probably is in need of a defensive tackle being the New Orleans Saints, who just recently released their starting defensive tackle. So they could easily be in the market for a guy like Gerald Casey or, even got maybe Quentin Jefferson, who just left the Bills. I think there are, almost every single team could use an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman. So I think there's a lot of different names that can go out there. As for the class overall, I think it's a pretty weak class. I think Casey, Jefferson, and Shelby Harris really have kind of separated from the others for the most part, because I really don't see much talent overall. I will say another guy I like a lot, Sheldon Rankins, 27 years old. I think that's another big name that can be connected to the Cincinnati Bengals, because they definitely are in need of finding a good 3-tech for their team, like I already said. But Rankins, most teams could really use a good 3-tech, I think, right now. And so I think, the Browns, Bengals, maybe even possibly the Raiders to find a guy next to Maurice Hurst. The Bill, I mentioned the Bills, the New Orleans Saints. There's several different teams that can really use a guy like that. I would say there's probably around more than half of the league that will probably be looking at adding some of these guys to pretty small deals. I honestly think outside of maybe Shelby Harris and maybe Sheldon Rankins, I really don't think there's many day one guys that will leave in free agency. A lot of these are going to be day 2, day 3 guys who are going to get prove-it deals on teams for pretty small, cheap money. So I think it's a very good chance that a lot of these guys go to teams that you probably aren't really expecting.
Yeah, to me, I mean, I look at the Jets for possibly edge rushers because they have a ton of cap space. I mean, Robert Saleh's defensive-minded coach, and I wouldn't be surprised if I believe Trey Hendrickson is a free agent. I wouldn't be surprised if he maybe go there. I really, really, really like Carlos Dunlap to the Vikings. I think that makes so much sense. They could, their defensive line this past season was not really good. Mike Zimmer, Dunlap, I mean, connection there. I think that would make a lot of sense. Barrett, I would be shocked if he does not re-sign with Tampa Bay. Somebody I personally like is, I know he was recently cut for a cap casualty, Kawan Short. I really, really like him going to the Washington football team. I know it kind of sounds weird because, they have an amazing defensive line. Deron Payne, Chase Young, so many young defensive players. But I feel like, Deron Payne, those defensive tackles, and those defensive linemen for Washington can learn a lot from Kawan Short because, it's not too long ago where he was a top 10 defensive tackle in the league. He was cut by Carolina not too long ago. There's also a connection with Ron Rivera there. Him coaching him in Carolina. I think that would make a lot of sense here. You mentioned Carl Lawson. I really expect Carl Lawson to re-sign with the Bengals. I would be shocked if he didn't. I know after the first, the Bengal fans were upset that Carl Lawson was not franchise tagged. To me, that would have been absolutely horrible if the Bengals would have franchise tagged him because that means you would have Carl Lawson and Sam Hubbard both free agents next season. I mean, you cannot have that. Personally, I wouldn't mind, Carl Lawson for about 3 for $42, something maybe along the lines of that. But I would be really surprised if Lawson is not in the Bengals uniform next season.
Yeah, I agree. I expect Lawson to be back, and I agree with you. I think there definitely was the argument that Lawson could be tagged for the team because they need to. Lawson is going to have a big market this year. Let's be real, and there is the question mark on whether or not the Bengals will be willing to outbid for him or not. And I also think Sam Hubbard, despite having a pretty successful career with Cincinnati, I know they really, really like him. I don't think he's going to have that big of a market. So it's not going to be nearly as stressful trying to give him a deal than would be Carl Lawson, in my opinion. I think Sam Hubbard is going to be looking more towards the $8 million range, I think, overall. That's just my prediction. Of course, he still has a whole entire season to play, so it could improve greatly. But assuming what we see now from Sam Hubbard, I think $8 million, maybe $7 million could be a fair price for him to re-sign. Meanwhile, Carl Lawson's, like you said, to be looking towards maybe a 3-year, $42 million deal. He's making around $14 million a year. He's going to be making almost double the money the guy like Sam Hubbard is. So he's going to be much more of a priority in my eyes. I think even if you are able to sign a guy like Carl Lawson, I think Cincinnati is still going to be looking at an edge rusher possibly, whether it's in the free agency or in the draft. A guy like Hassan Reddick from the Arizona Cardinals, who was one of the league leaders in sacks this year. They need to find a primary pass rusher to add next to a guy like Carl Lawson, who let's be real, he's a great pass rusher, don't get me wrong, but he sometimes has trouble getting sacks. What he does really, really well is providing pressure to the quarterback and forcing him to make mistakes, gets a lot of QB hits. I think adding him next to a guy like Hassan Reddick, who is proven to be able to get sacks at a very, very high rate, would be a great 1-2 punch there on the edge while you're letting guys like Sam Hubbard play on the edge in the first 2 downs. But then once he gets to the 3rd down, he can move inside next to a guy like DJ Reader to provide more pass rush on the interior. So I think overall Cincinnati should be in the market for looking to re-sign Carl Lawson on top of adding an extra edge rusher across from him.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to see Lawson back. Somebody I completely forgot about, had in my notes here, was Jadeveon Clowney. I really think a perfect place for him would be Cleveland. Last season, Cleveland was actually looking at Clowney. He signed with Tennessee. Did not have a good season. Cleveland was also looking at J.J. Watt just a week or so ago. He actually signed with Arizona. I really, really like that there. But, you mentioned maybe the Bengals start another defensive lineman aside from Carl Lawson. I really, really, really want this. I want to see the Bengals re-sign Mike Daniels. I mean, I know he's a free agent. He was on Good Morning Football today. Actually, just posted that interview, so you can check that on the channel. But I really think Mike Daniels, in my opinion, he did what he had to do. To me, he outperformed his contract. He's a veteran guy. You have him and DJ Reader. Mike Daniels, to me, I know he's not a top tier guy, but to me, he's a must sign in my opinion for the Bengals.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Mike Daniels. I really like what he did this year for the team. I think he would be a fantastic rotational defensive tackle for you if you want. He can play the 5 tech or the 1 tech, really, being a good nose tackle or a good rotational defensive lineman for your team. He's a very, very good run stopper and can add some support in the pass rush. So I think he is a very, very good option for Cincinnati if they would like to retain him. Also, to a certain extent, I really, really liked what I saw from Christian Covington as well. I think it's another name that might be looking to possibly re-sign to the team. But Cincinnati is going to have a lot of defensive tackles this year after adding Josh Tupou and Rennell Wren back from the COVID list. I believe Rennell Wren was in the IR. Josh Tupou being on the COVID list. So that's 2 of your former rotational tackles coming back on top of guys like Mike Daniels, Xavier Williams, and Christian Covington being possible re-signs for your team. So they're going to have a lot of guys who could probably hit camp and be contending for, a spot on the 53-man roster. But I agree with you. I think Mike Daniels would be an ideal third defensive tackle for your team across from guys like Mike Daniels and maybe a guy you add in the draft like a Davion Nixon, for example.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what the Bengals do with Carl Lawson, and we mentioned him. Defensive line, offensive line. We already talked about Joe Thuney. Maybe the Bengals can sign some offensive linemen. So hypothetical question: you can only sign one. Are you signing Carl Lawson or would you sign Joe Thuney?
This one's tough. I've gotten this question twice already, and both times I've really spent a long time thinking about it because it really depends. Because if a lot of people think it's Joe Thuney or bust, it really isn't. But if Joe Thuney ends up becoming your best option and your most likely option because guys like Kevin Zeitler are going elsewhere for cheaper deals, then I'll probably say Joe Thuney because you need to add a good guard in free agency this year. And getting a guy like Gabe Jackson could be a bigger risk because he's had injury histories and problems in the past. So I would like it just really depends on how the board falls, in my opinion. If I'm entering free agency and I get to choose immediately who's the first guy I'm going to sign, I'm probably going to end up choosing Carl Lawson simply because I think what we saw from him this year was probably his best season yet, and he did it with the Bengals. I think getting him back would be key to a good defensive line, mainly because I feel like if we lose Lawson, all of a sudden we have no one on defensive line outside of really DJ Reader. And, offensive line is struggling, don't get me wrong, but I think you can add a lot of different picks in the draft as well, like a Penei Sewell and possibly a Creed Humphrey in round 2 to really kind of bolster the offensive line. While meanwhile in the draft, there are some depth, especially on the interior, but not to the same extent that I think by signing a guy like Carl Lawson would be for this team. So I think Joe Thuney is more of a replaceable guy for your squad than a guy like Carl Lawson is. Carl Lawson is more of a one-of-a-kind kind of guy, in my opinion, due to how effective he was in the pass rush. So my answer right now would be Carl Lawson, but don't get it twisted because, without question, offensive line is the biggest need for this team, and they need to find a way to re-sign a lot of guys. I just think that the market for offensive line is a lot bigger this year in both the draft and free agency, so you could probably find some outside guys to help fix it rather than just getting Joe Thuney.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. To me, I would probably go Carl Lawson too. It is really, really close. But the reason I'm going to go with Lawson is because we already talked about how many guards there are in free agency that we could possibly sign. Schwartz, Gabe Jackson, Zeitler. I would much rather have a situation where we re-sign Carl Lawson and sign Kevin Zeitler than we would Joe Thuney, in my opinion. And let's say, for instance, we sign Carl Lawson, we can get a guard in free agency. But let's say we sign Joe Thuney instead of re-signing Carl Lawson. Edge class is loaded, but I really don't see anybody, who's going to be better than Carl Lawson. I really, really like Patrick Jones, like Carlos Basham, either one of those guys in the second. But at the same time, there's still probably bigger team needs there in the second round than the edge rusher, unless Lawson is gone. I would go Lawson, but it is really close. I feel like, we had 17 sacks in 16 games this season. I believe Carl Lawson, he didn't have 10 sacks, but I believe he was responsible for about 10 sacks this past season. You take him off our team, our defense, we really don't have anybody great on our defensive line. I know DJ Reader, but he's coming off a season-ending injury. Sam Hubbard was injured this past season, had a down year. It is really, really tough. But here, I would probably have to go Carl Lawson.
It's a really, really good conversation, and if we were to add Tooney and lose Carl Lawson, I would not be extremely happy. But at the same time, I would understand wanting to add a guy like Joe Tooney over Carl Lawson, just because your main priority this year is to build around Joe Burrow, and Joe Tooney would be the better overall guy to build around for Joe Burrow personally. So I think that that definitely makes sense in my eyes. I just think I agree with you. I think that there's many more guys in this free agency pool like Kevin Zeitler, Andrew Norwell, Trey Turner, who could be still effective replacements. But if you lose a guy Carl Lawson, I mean, he's probably the second best edge rusher in this free agency pool. You have guys like Bud Dupree, Hassan Reddick, Melvin Ingram, who are solid options, but they are not going to replace the value you just lost from losing Carl Lawson. So I think I see this from a value perspective. I think Carl Lawson, not only is he more of a important piece, a good scheme fit for your team, a guy who's already used to your team. I think he's also right now the better player, and I think getting the better player back is more important.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I'd probably rather have Lawson right now than Tooney. I feel like lots of Bengal fans would probably rather have Tooney than Carl Lawson because they just want the offensive line fixed, and. But like we said, there's so many offensive linemen, guards in particular. If we re-sign Carl Lawson and if we sign Kevin Zeitler, I would much rather have a situation like that than us signing Joe Tooney and Carl Lawson walks. I mean, give me Zeitler and Lawson 100% of the day over Joe Tooney. I know Joe Tooney is probably better than Kevin Zeitler, but Carl Lawson is so important to our defense. Like I said, he was so helpful to our defense. Without him, I mean, our defense would somehow be worse. Zeitler, he's pretty good. Obviously he would start right away. But Joe Tooney's, his deal, he's probably going to get paid more than Lawson. But it's just going to be really interesting. There's so many scenarios where the Bengals can make. And, I mean, Lawson, Tooney, if Trent Williams would somehow be available, free agency. I mean, it's just the possibilities it's just crazy. So it's kind of switching gears here to linebacker. There's not really a ton of linebackers, in free agency. There's about Quan Alexander. There's Kyle Van Noy, who was recently released by the Miami Dolphins. Van Noy, I think Patriots. I think it just makes way too much sense there. I mean, he signed I believe it was 4-year 41 or something like that, or 51, something along the line of that. Last season with Miami, I think it's cut. Nobody really expects. He was the team captain this past season, but I feel like Belichick has a plan, and I think one of those plans is re-signing Van Noy. Quan Alexander, that's a really interesting player there. I kind of think of it maybe like the Jets. They could really use some linebacker help. Neville Hewitt, he had over 100 tackles this past season with the Jets. He's actually free agent. And with Robert Saleh being a defensive-minded coach, I could kind of see Quan Alexander maybe going to the New York Jets as well.
Yeah, and I think another team is going to be big in the market for both Quan Alexander and Kyle Van Noy, the Cleveland Browns, who are in dire need of finding a good linebacker to kind of build around this team. The two top guys this year, Matt Milano and Levante David, are both returning to their teams, it looks like. So those are the two biggest names by far on the board, and they're both going to be gone. So you look at the tier 2 type guys, like you mentioned, Quan Alexander being one of the big names, and also Kyle Van Noy as well, really being the two main guys in my eyes. Are really, the two that's going to be most likely to find the bigger markets, at least on the board right now. But neither are going to be elite linebackers for your team, but good stopgap guys, I think, for a team that needs it. Also got Tahir Whitehead, who played for Carolina, could be another interesting name to keep an eye out for. Christian Jones as well could be a possibility. A couple of okay guys, no one too great though. Robert Spillane from Pittsburgh be another name. A lot of rotational guys, really. I think Cleveland being one of the main teams, I think, who's just really linebacker needy, as well as other teams on other sides. Like even though the Buffalo Bills got Matt Milano back, they could still use an extra inside linebacker for their team. There are a couple of teams that are needy of linebacker, but it's a very, very small market. I think it's going to be another similar to defensive tackle. It's going to be another one where you see a couple of prove-it deals from some different guys. I think just moving over to the Bengals, if they do in fact lose Josh Bynes, they could be one of those teams who offer a small contract to one of these guys here just to see what he can do for your team. Nothing too considerable, but just, like how they always do with their veteran linebackers, just offer him a small prove-it deal and see what he can do. I personally would rather them just re-sign Josh Bynes. I thought he was terrific last year from everything we wanted him to do. So, but they are currently also in conversation possibly for trying to get maybe an extra middle linebacker for your team. But overall, I think, the Browns, especially being, I think, the biggest, are probably going to look towards adding one of the bigger market linebackers like Kyle Van Noy for sure. But also, you already mentioned with Bill Belichick having such a great fit with Kyle Van Noy, didn't really have the cap space to add him next year. They do this year, so if they want to get him back, get their captain back on the defense, they easily could, and try to rebuild this defense back up again.
Yeah, I do think the Browns make so much sense there. I think they are definitely a possibility for some of the top linebackers. And to me, I don't think this linebacker class is absolutely loaded with talent. I would much rather, sign a guy like Quan Alexander than maybe reaching for like a guy like Nick Bolton in the first round. Like I would much rather have like the established star than take a risk on a guy in the first round who, I mean, if it doesn't work out, that's a huge risk because you're wasting the first round. Pick on him. Mac Wilson hasn't really turned out what Cleveland expected him to be. So Cleveland, I think that they could definitely be in the mix for a top linebacker. It'll be really interesting to see where some of the top linebackers go. Some corners and safeties. There's quite a bit of corners and safeties. In free agency as well. I mean, obviously you have William Jackson. Bengal, Richard Sherman, Patrick Peterson. There's so many good secondary players. So where do you think maybe some of these guys could maybe end up going?
Yeah, I don't remember who put this on Twitter, but I heard someone say this, and I was interested by this quote saying that they didn't think William Jackson and Shaquille Barrett were going to get big, interest in free agency, or we're going to draw a lot of interest. So it was a possibility that they might take some smaller deals. If that is the case, I'm not leaving out the possibility of William Jackson returning to the Bengals on another prove-it deal. I don't think it'll happen personally. I think Cincinnati's pretty much done with William Jackson now that they have got Trey Waynes already in the building. But I think it is certainly a possibility that there, maybe we see William Jackson return. I think specific teams like the New York Jets, who can easily use a cornerback, or maybe even the New England Patriots, who can also use cornerback now that they're likely to move on from Stephon Gilmore, could be two interesting teams to keep an eye out for, as well as other teams like the Cleveland Browns, who are in need of finding an extra CB2 across from Denzel Ward. Maybe even a team like the Las Vegas Raiders, who have a pretty poor secondary. They want to add some extra guys there to kind of help build around that team. I think those are the main fitters for a guy like William Jackson, who could find a pretty solid team to hopefully go to. Another team like the 49ers is another team I think could really, really use a good cornerback as well. Guys like Shaquille Griffin are in a very, very similar boat. I think he really has the same listed teams as well, like the 49ers, the Cleveland Browns, possibly the New York Jets, the New England Patriots are big name guys. But another name I want to really circle around that I like a lot, and I know Joe Goodberry does too on Twitter, is Ronald Darby, cornerback from the Washington football team, a guy that I really, really like as a specific fit for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think adding him across from Trey Waynes would do really, really well, because I think Ronald Darby works best as a CB2 for your team. And if you're paying Trey Waynes CB1 money to be that number one guy, getting a guy like Ronald Darby, who I think could be a lockdown as a second corner on the opposite side, could make the secondary a little bit better. Of course, they're probably also going to be in the market for a slot corner. So I'll also look at plenty of other guys on the slot corner market, like Mike Hilton, possibly being an addition to the team, or maybe Kevin King, or really just a lot of different guys I think could be possible additions. But on top of that, I think they could also use an outside guy like a Ronald Darby to be added to the team. There's just a lot of really, really good players on the market. Brian Poole is another name I like a lot. So maybe getting a guy like Brian Poole on top of a guy like Ronald Darby to really kind of round out the secondary for Cincinnati, now that they're likely to lose both Mackenzie Alexander and William Jackson, would be terrific for this team. I agree with you. This is a really, really good depth class for cornerbacks, especially on the slots, in the slots. So I think you're going to find a lot of guys there. As for the safety class, two of the main guys got tagged already, Marcus May and Justin Simmons, but I look at some other guys already on the list. There are a couple of good stopgap guys. I know the Bengals already met with the Atlanta Falcons free safety, and there are a couple other guys I could see getting some interest somewhere. Jaquiski Tart from San Francisco could be getting some interest as a free safety. Trey Boston, another name that I thought could be going somewhere else. DJ Swearinger is a pretty solid, player. I think could be a good rotational safety for your team. There are a couple of names. It's not nearly as stacked, in my opinion, as corner depth-wise, but there are still a couple of guys who could be finding rotational spots for certain teams, like maybe the Dallas Cowboys, who are in need of adding some more safeties.
Yeah, you look at the Cowboys. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, and they maybe sign a top corner because the first 5 or 6 games last season, their secondary and their defense was on pace to be one of the worst in NFL history. And if it wasn't for how bad their defense was playing, and if Dak Prescott did not get injured, I thought the Cowboys could have been really, really good this past season. But obviously he got hurt, and their defense was really, really bad. You mentioned William Jackson. I do kind of think the Browns are a possibility. Denzel Ward only has 1 year in his contract left. Greedy Williams, I believe he's coming off a season-ending injury. But for me, I think that would be a good fit. But I think a good fit also for the William Jackson would be the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, Trey Waynes was just signed by the Bengals last season, so was Mackenzie Alexander. They need that top corner. I think William Jackson could be that guy. Richard Sherman. I wouldn't be surprised if he signs with the Raiders. And there's been quite a bit of talk of him possibly signing Wooden in Las Vegas. I mean, there's quite a bit of good secondary players there. I would be really interesting. Somebody also, Patrick Peterson. To me, I really think Patrick Peterson, of all the free agents where players would go, this is probably the one I'm most confident in. I think he'll sell in the Buccaneers. I think it makes so much sense. Leftwich, Todd Bowles, all those guys. He was coached by those guys in Arizona. When they were really, really good, they could use that veteran corner there. And with Brady taking less money, guys to re-sign and veterans can get small deals. I could definitely see a situation where Patrick Peterson tries to get a ring before he retires in the NFL.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I think Patrick Peterson could go to a last-minute contender. The Buccaneers being probably the best fit for sure. I agree with you to add along Sean Murphy, Bunting, and Carlton Davis, who are already 2 really good young corners for that team, but adding him as a third guy to go with them, I think that would be a really good addition as well. But even if not, I think he probably goes to the other Super Bowl contending team, that being the New England Patriots, because they are in need of adding some more corners. I think Patrick Peterson could be another guy who comes in as a veteran leader for your team and can be pretty solid. I could be wrong, but I believe Patrick Peterson will be suspended for the first couple of games, so I don't know how much of a market he will get due to the suspension. But I think he's still definitely going to be a pretty important name to watch. But I do have to say, though, even though this free agency class of corners is great, it might even be a better draft class for corners because there are so many guys depth-wise who I think can be fantastic. Caleb Farley, Patrick Surtain, Greg Newsome, J.C. Horn, Asante Samuel Jr., who I love. A lot of guys there. Elijah Molden, Fatu Melifonwu. So many great corners in this draft class that I like a lot that could also be added in maybe the second or third round of the draft. So, if these teams maybe instead of, getting a guy like Patrick Peterson, who is a little bit older, or a guy like Janoris Jenkins, who also is pretty solid, but also a little bit older, maybe look towards adding some more guys in the draft too. So it might make the market for those kind of guys a little bit smaller than what is expected.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting with corners. And when we started talking about corners and safeties, you mentioned you saw something, and I saw it too. I can't remember who it was from. William Jackson may not get a ton of looks from people. We kind of saw the situation a year or so ago with Darqueze Dennard. Nobody thought he was going to go to Cincinnati. He ends up, signing a 1-year deal. Plays with us and everything. I wouldn't be against William Jackson re-signing with us, but at the same time, I think money has to come in the factor. I think William Jackson will want quite a bit of money. I think he'll probably get to the 8 to 12 range. Well, probably about 10 to 12, something along the lines of that. And, if he does not re-sign with the Bengals, I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of go corner quite early in the draft because, we have Trey Waynes. He's our cornerback 1. He has a ridiculous contract, in my opinion. He's yet to play a snap for us. Our second corner is Darius Phillips, who's a free agent 1 year from now. Aside from that, we didn't really have anybody that good. And the final topic here is, if you're able to sign a good guard like Kevin Zeitler or re-sign a pretty good corner, William Jackson, which one would you do here?
Yeah, I think in this case, I would probably lean towards Kevin Zeitler over William Jackson, at least in my opinion. I think my main issue is outside of Joe Tooney and Kevin Zeitler, how many trustworthy guys are out there in the offensive guard class? There are plenty of offensive guards available, but a lot of them are getting up there in age or have had a bad injury history, like Gabe Jackson and Trey Turner, who have had problems in the past. I believe Trey Turner had the worst year of his career by far last year with the Chargers. So there are a lot of question marks afterwards. I think, especially looking at the draft class, I think Kevin Zeitler, adding Kevin Zeitler and drafting a guy like Asante Samuel round 2 or Greg Newsome round 2 would be a lot better than getting a guy like William Jackson added back, and then we're trying to reach after a guard like an Aaron Banks type in round 2 or 3, where you don't really get as much value for your pick. So in my eyes right now, I would say William Jackson is probably a better player for sure, but I think adding a guy like Kevin Zeitler, since the market is a lot smaller offensive guard, he would be a huge addition for protecting Joe Burrow. Is already very familiar with the offense. Of course, being a former Cincinnati Bengal, he already knows his way around. He's very, very familiar with the front office. Has a lot of friends around there. He is back in his hometown, or back in his original place where he started playing in NFL football. So I think he could be prime for having a big comeback and performing really, really well that year. So I think overall it'd probably be a better position for the Bengals to look at, getting a guy like Kevin Zeitler over a guy like William Jackson, because I think you can probably add better corners afterwards. Rather, as for Zeitler, I don't really know if you can get much better outside of Zeitler.
Yeah, I agree. I would also rather have Zeitler than Jackson. And what you said, the corners are much more. There's much more depth at corner, and the corner class in the draft is way better than guard. I mean, Asante Samuel and Greg Newsome in the second round, I think will be much better, because you mentioned Banks. You look at Banks and Ben Cleveland from Georgia. You don't want to reach one of those guys. I mean, Kevin Zeitler would probably be a better option, and he's probably going to be cheaper than William Jackson anyway. So it's going to be really interesting to see, what Cincinnati does in free agency, and where some of the top free agents were signed with. So can you tell some of the listeners who can follow you on social media?
Yeah, my Instagram page is @StripeHypeCincy. Just go follow me there. My old page was taken down, so I've been trying to build my followers back up for quite a while now. Also, feel free to follow my website at BengalsInsiders.com. I have a lot of writers down there, writing pretty much an article every single day, updating everything, all the news that's going on, and having analysis as well. Go check that out if you could. And also check out my Twitter, Blake Jude 714. I cover both the Bengals and NFL draft analysis down there. So thank you again for having me on, and I appreciate you. I had a lot of fun going over all these free agents.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure to go follow him and the link in the description below. Make sure to follow me on the ticker thing here, showing me the social media. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would really appreciate it. And I will see you next time on Sports 200.